I never thought I'd end up here, spilling my guts on the internet about something so personal. My name's Mike, and I've spent the last week feeling like my entire world got ripped out from under me. My wife, Jessica, someone I've trusted with my life for 6 years, just shattered that trust into a million pieces. I keep asking myself, how did we get here? How did I not see this coming? But the truth is, maybe I did. Maybe the signs were there all along, and I just didn't want to see them. Jessica and I met in college. She was this fiery, ambitious woman who could light up a room with her smile. She had dreams of becoming a teacher, but after graduation, she found a niche working as a nanny. She loved kids, always had, and when she landed a gig with the Millers, it seemed perfect. The Millers were a wealthy family with a 3-year-old daughter, Mia. Jessica adored her. She'd come home with these cute little stories about the games they played, or how Mia mispronounced words in ways that made them hilarious. She genuinely seemed happy. For a long time, I didn't think much about her job beyond being grateful that she loved what she did. The Millers, Brian and Emily, seemed like a nice enough couple. They lived in this big, fancy house across town. Brian worked in real estate, and Emily was some kind of corporate exec who traveled a lot. We even had dinner with them once, just a casual thing when Jessica suggested we should get to know them better. I remember Brian being, well, charming, I guess. The kind of guy who could sell sand in the desert. He cracked jokes, slapped my back like we were old buddies, and had this easy confidence about him. If I'm being honest, I didn't like him much. He had that slick vibe, like someone used to getting what they wanted. But Jessica brushed off my reservations, saying I was just reading too much into it. For a while, life went on as normal. But then little things started to change. At first, it was nothing I could put my finger on, just a feeling, you know? Jessica would come home later than usual, saying Brian needed her to stay late, because Emily was out of town and he had some emergency meetings. I didn't think much of it. Her hours had always been flexible. But it started happening more and more. Then there was her phone. Jessica used to be so casual with it, leaving it on the counter, letting it buzz without a second thought. Now, it was glued to her hand. She'd keep it face down or tucked in her bag, even when we were sitting on the couch watching TV. I told myself she was probably just scrolling through social media or chatting with her friends. But when I'd casually asked about her day, her answers felt rehearsed. Like she was saying what she thought I wanted to hear. The breaking point for me came 2 weeks ago. Jessica walked in the door around 9 p.m., way later than usual, claiming Brian had called her in for an emergency meeting about Mia's preschool applications. I didn't even know preschool applications could be an emergency, but okay, whatever. What really threw me off was how she looked. Jessica was wearing this dress, a fitted, burgundy thing I hadn't seen before, and her makeup was done like she'd been out on a date. Her hair was curled, and she smelled like a perfume I didn't recognize. Didn't know nanny jobs came with formal wear requirements, I joked, trying to keep it light. Her response? Defensive, and way too quick. Can't I dress up for once without you questioning me? I remember standing there, dumbfounded, as she brushed past me into the bathroom. She didn't even wait for me to respond. That's when the alarm bells in my head started going off. This wasn't Jessica, not the Jessica I knew anyway. She was usually an open book, never one to keep secrets. Now she felt like a stranger. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention. She was always on her phone, smiling at messages but tucking it away whenever I walked into the room. When I asked her how Mia was doing, she'd mumble something vague and change the subject. One night, while we were watching a movie, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, smiled, and then quickly shoved it into her pocket. Work stuff, she said, not even looking at me. That gut feeling I'd been trying to ignore? It was screaming at me now. Something was wrong. Really wrong. But I didn't know how to bring it up without sounding paranoid. I mean, what do you even say to your wife when you suspect she might be lying to you? Instead of confronting her, I decided to pay closer attention. If my gut was right, I'd find out. If it wasn't, I could chalk it up to my own insecurities and move on. At least, that's what I told myself. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously off. The woman who once shared every detail of her day with me had become distant, guarded, almost like she was living in her own bubble that I wasn't allowed to touch. I wasn't proud of the fact that I started keeping mental tabs on her behavior, but I couldn't help it. It was like I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining things. A few days later, Jessica had another late night. She claimed Brian needed her to stay over and help Mia with her bedtime routine since Emily was out of town. It sounded reasonable. Jessica adored that kid, and she was great at calming her down when she got fussy. But when Jessica came home, she looked flushed. Not like she'd been dealing with a hyperactive toddler, but like she'd just come back from something far more intimate. "Rough night?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah," she replied quickly, avoiding my gaze as she kicked off her heels. "Mia was a handful tonight." That would have been the end of it, except for one thing. Her phone buzzed, and I caught a glimpse of the notification before she snatched it up. It was a text from Brian. "Hope you got home safe. Can't stop thinking about tonight." My stomach dropped. I froze, pretending not to notice, but inside my mind was racing. What did that mean? Thinking about tonight? What exactly had happened? I wanted to call her out right then and there, but I couldn't. Not without proof. Jessica must have felt my eyes on her because she quickly shoved her phone into her bag. "I'm exhausted," she said, forcing a yawn. "I'm gonna shower and head to bed." "Sure," I muttered, my throat dry. As soon as she disappeared into the bathroom, I felt this overwhelming urge to do something I'd never done before: look through her phone. It was sitting right there in her bag, so close I could feel its pull like a magnet. But just as I reached for it, I stopped myself. What if I was wrong? What if it really was work-related and I was just letting my insecurities get the best of me? I spent the rest of the night pacing the living room, staring at the clock, replaying every interaction in my head. The way she brushed me off, the way she smiled at her phone, the text from Brian, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to put together. By the next morning, I decided I couldn't live in this limbo anymore. I needed answers. Jessica was already gone by the time I woke up, another early shift at the Millers. I went about my day as usual, but that knot in my stomach wouldn't go away. Around lunchtime, I texted her something casual. "Hey, how's Mia today?" No response. An hour passed. Then 2. Finally, she replied. "Busy with Mia. Call you later." The problem? Jessica never ignored my texts for that long, even when she was busy. Something wasn't adding up. That evening, when she finally came home, she was unusually cheerful. She walked in humming to herself, carrying a shopping bag that looked like it came straight from a designer boutique. "What's that?" I asked, nodding toward the bag. "Oh, just something I picked up on my way home," she said, flashing me a smile that felt almost too bright. "Brian let me off early, so I had some time to shop." Brian let her off early? The same Brian who supposedly couldn't survive a single night without her help. It didn't make sense. I tried to push the thought aside, but it stayed with me all evening. Later, while Jessica was in the shower, I made a decision. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed to know the truth. I grabbed her phone from her bag, heart pounding in my chest, and unlocked it. The first thing I noticed was a text thread with Brian pinned at the top of her messages. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through it, my eyes scanning the words. "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. You're all I want, Jess. Can't wait to see you again." I stopped reading, my vision blurring as the reality of what I was seeing hit me. My wife wasn't just working late or staying over to help with Mia. She was having an affair with Brian. I locked her phone and put it back where I found it, my hands shaking as I tried to process what I just discovered. The betrayal hit me like a freight train, leaving me breathless. Jessica, the woman I thought I'd spend my life with, had been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back. By the time she came out of the shower, I couldn't even look at her. I pretended to be asleep, but my mind was wide awake, spiraling into a storm of anger, hurt, and disbelief. I knew I had to confront her. But not yet. I needed time to figure out how to handle this, how to protect myself from whatever fallout was coming. One thing was clear, though: my marriage would never be the same again. The next morning, everything felt surreal. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee while Jessica stood at the counter, texting someone, probably Brian. She was so casual about it, humming a tune as if nothing in the world was wrong. I couldn't believe it. How could she stand there, act so normal, after what I'd seen on her phone? She turned around, her smile bright and cheerful. "What's your day looking like?" she asked, like she cared. I wanted to snap, to scream at her that I knew what she was doing, but I bit my tongue. My anger bubbled just beneath the surface, but I needed more than just those texts before I confronted her. If I came at her now, she'd just deny it, spin some story about how Brian's messages were misunderstood, or taken out of context. I wasn't going to give her that chance. "Same as usual," I said, keeping my voice even. "Work, meetings, the usual grind." She nodded, glancing at her phone again. "Cool. I've got another long day with Mia. Emily's still out of town, so Brian asked if I could help out late again." There it was. The lie, right to my face. I stared at her, trying to see any flicker of guilt, but she just smiled like she hadn't just stabbed me in the back the night before. "Sounds busy," I said, forcing a smile. Inside, my stomach churned. Once she left, I sat on the couch, staring at my phone. I felt paralyzed, unsure of what to do next. I needed to know more. I needed to confirm what I already knew deep down, that my wife was sleeping with another man. I decided to take a sick day from work. My boss was understanding enough, and I figured one day off wouldn't hurt. I spent the morning doing something I never thought I'd do, researching how to catch a cheating spouse. I felt pathetic, reading through articles and forums, but it gave me direction. I wasn't just going to sit here and let this happen. By the afternoon, I had a plan. I called up my buddy, Jason, someone I trusted like a brother. He was the kind of guy who could keep a secret, and wasn't afraid to tell me the hard truths when I needed them. "Mike, you sure about this?" Jason asked after I spilled everything. "I mean, maybe you're misreading it. Maybe there's an explanation." "There's no explanation, Jason," I said, my voice hard. "I saw the texts. I saw the way she acts around her phone. I'm not imagining this. She's cheating on me, and I need proof." Jason sighed on the other end of the line. "All right, man. What do you need from me? Can you watch her? Just follow her after she leaves work. I need to know where she's going and what she's doing." He agreed, and I felt a small weight lift off my shoulders. At least I wasn't in this alone. That night, Jessica came home late again. She walked through the door, her cheeks flushed, her hair slightly messy. She was holding a plastic bag with takeout, and smiled at me like nothing was wrong. "Picked up dinner," she said, setting the bag on the counter. "Thanks," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. We sat across from each other at the dining table, eating in silence. She scrolled through her phone between bites, barely looking at me. I stared at her, wondering how long she thought she could keep this up. "You all right?" she asked suddenly, noticing my stare. "Yeah," I said quickly, looking down at my food. "Just tired." She nodded and went back to her phone. I hated how easily she lied, how effortlessly she played the part of the perfect wife while carrying on behind my back. Later that night, Jason called. "Mike, I followed her after she left work," he said, his voice low. "She didn't come straight home. She stopped at some hotel on the other side of town." My heart sank. "How long was she there?" "About 2 hours," Jason said. "And guess who showed up about 10 minutes after her?" I didn't need him to say it. "Brian." "Yeah," Jason confirmed. "They didn't even try to hide it, Mike. They went in separately, but it was obvious. My hands tightened around the phone. I felt a mix of rage and despair, like the ground had been ripped out from under me. It wasn't just my gut telling me something was wrong anymore. I had confirmation. Jessica wasn't just lying, she was betraying me in the worst way possible. "Thanks, man," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You okay?" Jason asked. "No," I admitted. "But I will be." After I hung up, I sat in the dark, staring at nothing. The woman I loved, the woman I trusted, was sneaking around with another man, one who had looked me in the eye and pretended to be friendly. I wasn't just angry, I was humiliated. But if Jessica thought she could keep this up, she was wrong. I wasn't going to let her destroy our marriage without consequences. It was time to make my move. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The shock was gone, replaced by cold determination. If Jessica wanted to lie, if Brian thought he could toy with my marriage, they were both about to find out that I wasn't the fool they thought I was. She left for work as usual, dressed in one of her tailored blouses and fitted slacks. I watched her walk out the door, her phone already in hand, probably texting him. I didn't say anything, didn't ask her about her day or offer a goodbye kiss. She barely noticed. As soon as she was gone, I called Jason. "Mike," he said when he picked up. "You good, man?" "Not even close," I replied, grabbing my keys. "I need more. If this goes to court, if this blows up, I need proof. Real, undeniable proof." Jason didn't hesitate. "All right. What's the plan?" "I'm heading to that hotel," I said. "I want to see it with my own eyes. If she's stupid enough to do it again, I'll be there." It felt surreal driving across town, my stomach twisted in knots. I parked my car down the street from the hotel Jason had mentioned, the one where they'd been the day before. It was a nondescript building, the kind of place you wouldn't glance at twice. Perfect for sneaking around. I waited in my car, my heart racing every time someone walked in or out of the building. Minutes felt like hours, but then, just as Jason had said, Jessica's car pulled into the lot. She parked, stepped out, and walked straight into the lobby without looking back. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. She wasn't even trying to hide it. She didn't even hesitate. 10 minutes later, another car pulled up. Brian. I recognized him instantly, slicked back hair, expensive suit, that smug look I'd always hated. He strode into the hotel like he owned the place, his confidence making me sick. I sat there for a moment, my hands shaking. Part of me wanted to storm in there, catch them red-handed, and end this charade right then and there. But I stopped myself. That wasn't the smart play. If I went in guns blazing, they'd deny it, twist the story, and somehow make me the bad guy. I needed evidence. That's when I remembered the private investigator I'd read about during my research. A guy named Neil. His website promised discretion and results, and I was desperate enough to take him at his word. I called him from the car. "Neil speaking," a gruff voice answered. I quickly explained the situation, my words tumbling over each other. Neil listened without interrupting, and when I was done, he simply said, "I can help. Text me the address and their details. I'll take care of the rest." I sent him everything, names, photos, the hotel location, and then sat back, my heart pounding. If this guy was as good as his reviews said, I'd finally have the proof I needed. The hours dragged on, but eventually, Neil texted me. "Got what you need. Sending it now." Moments later, a file landed in my inbox. Photos. There they were, clear as day, Jessica and Brian walking into the hotel together, hand in hand. Another showed them at the front desk, Brian's arm casually draped around her waist. Then the one that hit hardest, a shot of them entering a room. I stared at the images, my chest tightening. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It wasn't just texts or vague excuses. This was undeniable. When Jessica came home that night, I could barely look at her. She walked through the door like nothing had happened, tossing her bag onto the couch and kicking off her shoes. "Long day," she sighed, heading to the fridge for a drink. I bit back the urge to say something, to confront her right then and there. Not yet. I wasn't ready. Instead, I just nodded, keeping my face neutral. Dinner? She asked, glancing at me over her shoulder. I'm not hungry, I said, standing up. Got some work to finish. Okay, she replied, oblivious as ever. I went upstairs, shut the door to my office, and stared at the photos on my laptop. My hands trembled as I forwarded them to Jason. He called me immediately. Mike, damn. This is it, man. This is everything you need. I know, I said quietly, my throat tight. You ready to confront her? Not yet, I replied. I need one more thing. I need to hear them. If I have that, she can't spin this. She can't twist the story. Jason hesitated. You sure about that? Isn't this enough? It's enough for me, I said. But not for her. She'll lie her way out of this unless I have something she can't deny. I spent the rest of the night researching recording devices, determined to get the final piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just about catching Jessica anymore, it was about taking back control of my life. The storm was building, and soon, it would break. The morning after receiving the photos, I woke up feeling a strange combination of dread and resolve. I wasn't just hurt anymore, I was angry. Jessica had treated me like a fool for long enough, and Brian? He probably thought he was untouchable, sneaking around with another man's wife like he wasn't wrecking 2 lives in the process. Jessica had her usual routine planned: breakfast, a rushed goodbye, and off to the miller's. Another long day? I asked casually as she grabbed her keys. Yeah, probably, she said, not even looking at me. I watched her leave, my stomach churning. The woman I loved, or thought I loved, was walking out the door, carrying her lies with her. But today, I wasn't going to sit back and let her keep fooling me. Today, I was putting my plan into motion. The first stop was a local electronics store, where I bought a voice-activated recorder small enough to fit into her purse. It was discreet, and the salesperson assured me it could pick up conversations clearly, even through fabric. I hated that it had come to this, spying on my own wife, but she'd left me no choice. Next I called Neil, the private investigator. Neil, it's Mike, I said as soon as he picked up. What's the plan? He asked. I need to catch them in the act, I said. Not just photos, audio. Something that leaves no room for doubt. You're looking for a direct confrontation? Not yet, I replied. I want to let her bury herself first. Can you follow her today? If she goes to that hotel again, I need to know. Neil agreed, and I spent the rest of the day waiting, trying to focus on anything other than the pit in my stomach. Around 2 p.m., my phone buzzed. Neil's message was brief. She's here. Same hotel. Brian showed up 15 minutes after her. My pulse quickened. This was it, the moment I'd been bracing for. I grabbed the recorder, slipped it into Jessica's bag, and waited for her to come home. When she finally walked through the door, she looked different. She had that same glow she'd had the other night, but there was something else. Guilt? Relief? I couldn't tell. Hey, she said, her tone light as she kicked off her shoes. Hey, I replied, forcing a smile. How was work? Fine, she said quickly, brushing past me to set her bag on the counter. I knew better than to push. Instead, I played it cool, offering to order takeout and put on one of her favorite shows. She seemed grateful, and for a moment, I almost believed the facade we were both keeping up. That night, after she went to bed, I retrieved the recorder from her bag and plugged it into my laptop. My hands shook as I pressed play. At first, there was nothing but the rustling of fabric and muffled noises. But then, clear as day, came the sound of Jessica's voice. Are you sure this is safe? She asked, her tone nervous. It's fine, Brian replied, his voice smooth and confident. No one's going to find out. Besides, you deserve this. I clenched my fists as I listened to the conversation unfold. There was no ambiguity, no way to twist what they were saying. They talked about their feelings, about how perfect their arrangement was. Then came the part that made my stomach turn. Jessica laughed softly. I feel guilty sometimes, you know? Mike's been so sweet lately. Brian chuckled. Sweet doesn't mean exciting, Jess. You deserve more than whatever that is. I hit pause, unable to stomach any more. My mind raced, torn between fury and heartbreak. It was one thing to suspect, to see the photos, but hearing her voice, hearing her talk about me like I was just some boring obstacle in her life, was unbearable. I spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, the recorder sitting on the table like a bomb waiting to go off. By morning, I had a new plan. The evidence wasn't just for me anymore. It was going to be for her. For Brian. For anyone who thought they could get away with this. This wasn't just about catching her. This was about making sure she couldn't talk her way out of it. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I was carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. Every moment with Jessica felt like a lie, every word she spoke tainted by the betrayal I now knew in vivid detail. But I couldn't confront her without a clear plan. This wasn't just about unleashing my anger. It was about making sure she faced the consequences of everything she'd done. Jessica left early again, claiming Brian had asked her to come in, extra early, to help Mia get ready for a playdate. The audacity of her lies almost made me laugh. After she walked out the door, I grabbed my phone and called Jason. It's happening today, I told him. Jason didn't need me to explain. You ready for this? I don't know if ready is the right word, I admitted, pacing the living room. But I can't keep living like this. It's time. Jason agreed to meet me at a cafe near the hotel in case I needed backup. I wasn't planning to bring him in for the confrontation, but knowing he was close by gave me some peace of mind. Next, I called Neil. They're already at the hotel, he informed me. Checked in about an hour ago. Keep an eye on them, I said. If they leave before I get there, I need to know. Understood, Neil replied. I hung up and sat at the dining table, staring at the recorder in front of me. My chest was tight with anger, pain, and something I couldn't quite name. I knew this confrontation was going to change everything. But the truth? I wanted it to. Around noon, I drove to the hotel. I parked a few blocks away and walked the rest of the distance, my heart pounding harder with every step. Neil was waiting in the lobby when I arrived. They're in room 307, he said quietly, nodding toward the elevator. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Did they see you? No, he assured me. I stayed out of sight. Thanks, I said, clapping him on the shoulder. I'll handle it from here. As I rode the elevator up to the third floor, I felt like my body was on autopilot. My mind was racing with everything I wanted to say, every emotion I'd kept bottled up for weeks. When the doors opened, I stepped into the hallway, my footsteps eerily quiet on the carpeted floor. I stopped in front of room 307, my hand hovering over the door. For a moment, I hesitated. Did I really want to do this? Was I ready to see them together, to hear whatever excuses they'd come up with? Then I remembered the recorder, the photos, the texts. The lies. I knocked on the door. There was a moment of silence, followed by muffled voices. Then the door opened slightly, just enough for Brian to poke his head out. His confident smirk disappeared the instant he saw me. Mike, he said, his voice tight. What are you doing here? I didn't answer. I pushed the door open, forcing him to stumble back, and stepped inside. Jessica was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face pale as she clutched a blanket around herself. She froze when she saw me, her eyes wide with shock and guilt. Mike, she whispered. This isn't what it looks like. I couldn't help but laugh, a bitter, hollow sound. Really? Because it looks exactly like what I think it is. Brian started to speak, but I cut him off with a glare. Don't even try it. I'm not here to listen to your excuses. I know everything. Jessica's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. Mike, please, let me explain. Explain? I snapped, my voice rising. Explain what, Jess? The texts? The photos? The fact that I heard every word of your little love fest yesterday? Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She looked at Brian, who stood there like a deer in headlights, completely useless. I trusted you, I said, my voice shaking with anger. I loved you. And this? This is what I get in return. Jessica sobbed, her hands covering her face. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean for this to happen. It just happened. Brian finally found his voice. Look, Mike, I think we should all calm down and… I turned on him, my fury spilling over. Shut up. You don't get to play peacemaker. You're a liar and a coward, and you destroyed your own family and mine. He stepped back, his hands raised defensively. All right. I looked back at Jessica, my heart breaking all over again. You had a choice, Jess. You could have come to me. We could have worked on this. But instead you lied over and over. And now? There's no coming back from this. Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't stay to comfort her. I turned and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind me. The sound echoed in the hallway as I marched back to the elevator, my fists clenched. When I got outside, Jason was waiting in his car. I climbed in, slamming the door shut. How'd it go? He asked cautiously. I stared straight ahead, my chest heaving. It's over, I said simply. She's not the person I thought she was. Jason nodded, his expression somber. You did what you had to do. As we drove away, I felt a strange sense of relief. The worst part was over, but the road ahead was still uncertain. I didn't know what would come next, but one thing was clear: I wasn't going to let them win. Not now. Not ever. When I got home, the silence hit me harder than the confrontation. Jessica wasn't there, but her presence still lingered in every corner of the house. The photos on the wall, the faint scent of her perfume, the neatly folded blanket on the couch, it all felt suffocating. I dropped my keys on the counter and sat at the dining table, staring at the empty chair across from me. It was the same chair where Jessica had smiled and told me about her long days with Mia. The same chair where she'd laughed at my dumb jokes while texting Brian under the table. The weight of everything crashed over me, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself feel it fully. The anger, the humiliation, the sadness, it was all-consuming. I had spent weeks pretending, holding it all in while I gathered evidence and planned my move. Now that it was done, there was nothing left to do but face the mess my life had become. I picked up my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I landed on Jessica's name. My finger hovered over the call button, but I couldn't bring myself to press it. What was there to say? She knew I'd caught her. There was no point in yelling or demanding explanations. I'd heard enough from her and Brian at the hotel. Instead, I called Jason. "How you holding up?" he asked as soon as he picked up. "Honestly? Like garbage," I admitted, leaning back in my chair. I thought confronting her would make me feel better, but it didn't. It just made everything feel more real. Jason sighed. "That's because it is real, Mike. You're finally seeing her for who she is, and that's not an easy thing to process. But you did the right thing. Now you can start figuring out what comes next." "What comes next?" I repeated, the words hollow. "Divorce, I guess." "Yeah," Jason said quietly. "Do you want me to recommend a lawyer?" "I think I'll need one," I replied. "I'm not letting her walk away from this without consequences." We talked for a while longer before I hung up, feeling slightly more grounded. Jason had always been the practical one, and his level-headedness was exactly what I needed right now. I spent the rest of the day going through our paperwork, bank statements, insurance policies, anything I could think of that might be important for a divorce case. As much as I hated the idea of going through a messy legal battle, I knew I had to protect myself. Jessica might be sobbing and apologizing now, but if Brian had taught her anything, it was how to scheme. Around 8 p.m., Jessica came home. I heard her car pull into the driveway, followed by the soft click of the front door. She stepped inside hesitantly, her face streaked with tears, her shoulders slumped. "Mike," she began, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I stayed seated at the table, my expression blank. "What's there to talk about?" She flinched at the coldness in my tone, but she didn't back down. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I need you to understand, it wasn't about you. It was about me. I was—" "Stop," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "I don't want to hear your excuses. You had choices, Jess. You could have come to me. You could have been honest. Instead, you lied again and again, and for what? A fling with Brian?" Her face crumpled, and she sank into the chair across from me, the same chair that had haunted me earlier. "It wasn't just a fling," she admitted. I thought I wanted more. I thought Brian could give me something I was missing. But it was a mistake. I see that now." I leaned forward, my anger simmering beneath the surface. "A mistake? You've been sneaking around for months, lying to my face, and you call it a mistake?" She didn't respond, just stared down at her hands as tears dripped onto the table. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity for her, but it quickly vanished. Whatever she was feeling now didn't erase what she'd done. "I'm filing for divorce," I said finally, my voice steady. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic. "No, Mike, please. We can fix this. We can go to therapy, work on us. There is no us anymore." I cut in. "You made that decision the moment you chose him over me." Jessica broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, but I didn't move to comfort her. I couldn't. This wasn't a scene where I could swoop in and make everything better. The damage was done, and there was no going back. "I'll stay in the guest room tonight," she whispered through her tears. "Do whatever you want," I replied, standing up and walking out of the room. As I lay in bed that night, the house felt heavier than ever. Jessica's sobs echoed faintly from the other side of the house, but I forced myself to ignore them. This wasn't the life I'd envisioned when we got married, but it was the one I had now. And I wasn't going to let her or Brian dictate how it ended. The next morning, I woke up to an eerie stillness. I half expected Jessica to be gone, her things packed, a note left behind full of apologies or excuses. But when I walked downstairs, there she was, sitting on the couch, clutching a mug of coffee like it was the only thing holding her together. Her eyes were bloodshot, her face pale, and she didn't say a word as I passed her on my way to the kitchen. I wasn't in the mood for small talk, and I sure as hell didn't feel like playing the part of the understanding husband. As I poured my coffee, she finally spoke, her voice hoarse. "Did you mean what you said last night?" I turned to face her, leaning against the counter. "About the divorce?" "Yeah, I did." Her lip trembled, and she set her mug down with shaking hands. "Mike, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But we have years together, memories, a life we built. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" I sighed, my patience hanging by a thread. "It meant everything to me, Jess. That's why this hurts so much. But you threw it all away. You didn't just cheat, you lied over and over. You made me feel like I was crazy for noticing something was off. I wasn't thinking clearly," she said, her voice breaking. "I was lost, confused, and Brian, he was there." I slammed my mug onto the counter, the sound making her flinch. "Brian was there? That's your excuse? Do you even hear yourself? You didn't just have an affair, you planned this, Jess. You made choices, every single day, to betray me." She started to cry again, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I grabbed my coffee and headed upstairs to call Jason. "Morning," he said when he answered. "How's it going?" "Jessica's still here," I replied, pacing the hallway. "She's trying to talk me out of the divorce, but I'm not backing down. I can't." "Good," Jason said firmly. "You need to stick to your guns. Don't let her manipulate you into forgiving this." She made her bed. "I know," I said, exhaling deeply. "That's why I'm calling. I need to get the ball rolling with a lawyer. Do you have that recommendation? Jason gave me the name of a divorce attorney he knew, someone who specialized in cases involving infidelity. I thanked him and hung up, dialing the number immediately. The receptionist was polite, and after a brief explanation of my situation, she scheduled me for a consultation that afternoon. I felt a strange mix of dread and relief as I hung up. Taking this step made everything feel more real, but it also gave me a sense of control, something I hadn't felt in weeks. When I came back downstairs, Jessica was still on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. She looked up as I walked by, her eyes pleading. "Where are you going?" "Out," I replied curtly. "Don't wait up." Her face fell, but she didn't press me further. The lawyer's office was a quiet, professional space, and the attorney, Margaret, greeted me with a firm handshake and a no-nonsense demeanor. I told her everything, the affair, the texts, the photos, the audio recordings. She listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions where necessary. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "You have a strong case," she said. "Infidelity is a significant factor in divorce proceedings, especially if you can prove it. The evidence you've gathered is solid. What do I need to do next?" I asked. "First, we'll file the initial paperwork to formally begin the process," Margaret explained. "We'll also request a financial review to ensure there aren't any hidden assets or irregularities. Have you noticed any unusual activity in your joint accounts?" I shook my head. "Not that I've seen, but I'll check again tonight." "Good," she said. "Be thorough. In cases like this, it's not uncommon for the unfaithful spouse to start shifting funds around, especially if they think a divorce is imminent." The meeting lasted another hour, and by the time I left, I felt more prepared than I had in weeks. Margaret assured me that she would handle the legal side of things, but she also warned me to stay calm and avoid confrontations that could complicate the process. When I got home, Jessica was in the kitchen, cooking dinner like it was just another normal day. The smell of pasta filled the air, and for a brief moment, I almost felt like I'd stepped into a time before everything fell apart. But then I remembered the hotel, Brian, the lies. "Mike," she said tentatively as I walked in, "I thought we could have dinner together. Talk things over." I stared at her, incredulous. "Jess, there's nothing left to talk about. I've already spoken to a lawyer." Her hand froze mid-stir, the color draining from her face. "A lawyer?" she whispered. "Yeah," I said, my tone flat. "This is happening. You can cry, you can cook, you can beg, but it's not going to change what you did. We're done." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't stay to watch her break down again. I went upstairs, shutting the door to our bedroom, the one she'd effectively turned into a lie, and sat on the bed. This wasn't the life I wanted, but it was the one I had now. And I was finally ready to take control of it. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The house felt heavier than ever, like it was pressing down on me from all sides. Jessica was in the guest room. I hadn't seen her since our brief exchange about the lawyer. I knew she was probably crying, but I couldn't bring myself to care anymore. At some point, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from Jason. "How'd the lawyer meeting go? Need anything?" I stared at the screen for a moment before replying. "Went fine. Just exhausted. Thanks for asking." His response was immediate. "Hang in there. You're doing the right thing." I set the phone down and sighed. Everyone kept telling me I was doing the right thing, but it didn't feel like it. Sure, I had the upper hand now, with the evidence and the legal support, but no part of this felt like a victory. I wasn't sure it ever would. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of pots clanging in the kitchen. For a second, I thought Jessica might be making breakfast, a peace offering, maybe, but when I came downstairs, she wasn't there. Instead, I saw her suitcase by the door, packed and ready to go. She stood in the living room, clutching a coffee mug, her eyes red and swollen. "I thought about what you said," she began, her voice trembling. "About this being over." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. And, I think you're right, she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. I've ruined everything, Mike. I can't fix it, and I don't even know if I deserve to try. Her words should have felt like validation, but instead, they just made the ache in my chest worse. She wasn't fighting anymore. She wasn't trying to spin excuses or beg for another chance. She was just done. Where are you going? I asked, my voice hollow. To my sister's, she replied. At least for now. I thought it'd be better if I gave you some space. I nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. Part of me was relieved she was leaving. It would make the divorce process easier. But another part of me, the part that had once loved her so deeply, felt an unbearable sadness at the sight of her like this. All right, I said finally. She hesitated, looking like she wanted to say more, but then she just nodded and picked up her suitcase. As she opened the door, she turned back to me, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry, Mike. For everything. I didn't respond. I couldn't. She walked out, and the door clicked shut behind her, leaving me alone in the empty house. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at the door. The silence was deafening, and for the first time, I truly felt the weight of what had happened. This wasn't just the end of my marriage, it was the end of a life I'd spent years building. I spent the rest of the day cleaning the house, trying to distract myself from the gnawing emptiness. I scrubbed the kitchen counters, vacuumed the living room, and threw out anything that reminded me of her. Photos, knickknacks, even the bottle of wine we'd been saving for our anniversary. By the time evening rolled around, the house felt cleaner but somehow even lonelier. I ordered takeout and ate in front of the TV, not really paying attention to what was on. My mind kept drifting back to Jessica, to her tears, her apology, the way she looked when she walked out the door. Around 9 p.m., my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Neil, the private investigator. Brian's wife knows. Thought you'd want to be aware. My eyebrows shot up. I hadn't even considered how this would affect Emily, Brian's wife. From what I knew, she was out of town most of the time, probably working hard to support her family while her husband snuck around with my wife. How'd she find out? I typed back. She hired her own PI. Looks like she had suspicions too, Neil replied. I leaned back on the couch, letting out a long breath. It was strange, knowing someone else was going through the same thing I was. I wondered what Emily would do now. Would she confront Brian? File for divorce? Or would she try to salvage her marriage? My thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Frowning, I got up and opened it to find Jason standing there with a 6-pack of beer. Thought you could use some company, he said with a small smile. I stepped aside to let him in, grateful for the distraction. We sat on the couch, drinking in silence for a while before Jason finally spoke. You know, this sucks, he said bluntly. But it's better this way. She's gone, and now you can start putting yourself back together. I nodded, taking another sip of my beer. It just feels like I'm standing in the wreckage, trying to figure out what's salvageable. Jason clinked his bottle against mine. You'll figure it out, Mike. One piece at a time. As we sat there, talking about everything and nothing, I felt a small spark of hope for the first time in weeks. Maybe Jason was right. Maybe I could rebuild. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but I had to try. Jessica was gone, and the life I'd known was over. But my story wasn't. Not yet. The days after Jessica's departure passed in a blur. I threw myself into work, trying to drown out the memories of her, and everything we had built together. But no matter how busy I kept myself, the silence at home was deafening. Every creak of the floorboards, every echo of my own footsteps reminded me of what was missing, and what had been lost. Jason checked in on me regularly, dragging me out for beers or just sitting with me to watch a game. It helped, but only so much. At the end of the day, I was still alone, surrounded by the ghosts of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Then, one evening, I got an unexpected phone call. It was from an unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Mike?" a hesitant voice replied. It was a woman's voice, soft but tinged with exhaustion. "Yes." "Who's this?" "It's Emily," she said, and my stomach dropped. Brian's wife. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. My mind raced, wondering why she was calling me. Had she pieced everything together? Was she looking for answers? Or maybe revenge? "I hope it's okay that I'm calling," she continued, breaking the awkward silence. "I got your number from Neil. He said you'd understand." "Yeah," I replied, still caught off guard. "It's fine. What can I do for you?" Emily sighed, and I could hear the weight of her own heartbreak in that one breath. I wanted to talk to someone who understands. Someone who knows what it feels like." My grip on the phone tightened. "You found out, didn't you?" "Yes," she said softly. "I had my suspicions for months, but I never wanted to believe it. And then Neil sent me the photos, and there it was. Proof I couldn't ignore." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. As much as I hated Brian for what he'd done, I couldn't imagine the pain Emily must have felt seeing those photos for the first time. "Thanks," she replied. "I guess I just wanted to hear your side of things. How you're handling it. How you're surviving it." I leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. "I'm not sure I have a good answer for that," I admitted. "Some days it feels like I'm barely holding it together. Other days I feel a strange kind of relief that it's over, that I don't have to live in the dark anymore." Emily was quiet for a moment before she spoke again. "I feel the same way. It's like I'm grieving the life I thought I had, but at the same time, I'm angry that I didn't see it sooner." Her words hit close to home. "Yeah," I said. "That's exactly it. You start replaying everything in your head, wondering how you missed the signs. But it's not your fault, Emily. None of this is. Neither is it yours," she said gently. "I've read the messages, Mike. I've seen the pictures. They weren't just lying to us, they were mocking us. Acting like we were the fools while they lived out their little fantasy." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I realized she was crying. "Emily, listen to me," I said firmly. "You didn't deserve this, and neither did I. But we can't let them destroy us. We've already lost enough." She sniffled on the other end of the line. "You're right. I know you're right. It's just hard to let go." "I get it," I said. "But you're stronger than you think. You'll get through this." We talked for a while longer, sharing our stories and venting about the betrayals that had turned our lives upside down. By the time we hung up, I felt a strange sense of camaraderie with Emily, like we were two survivors of the same shipwreck, clinging to whatever pieces of the wreckage we could find. The next day, I got an email from Margaret, my lawyer. She had finalized the initial divorce filing and wanted to meet to go over the next steps. The sight of her name in my inbox sent a pang through my chest, but I pushed it aside. This was what I wanted, what I needed to move forward. When I arrived at her office, Margaret wasted no time diving into the details. "Jessica hasn't responded to the filing yet," she said, flipping through a folder. "But I expect she'll contest it. With cases involving infidelity, spouses often try to shift the narrative. She doesn't have a leg to stand on," I replied, my voice cold. "The evidence is airtight." "True," Margaret said, nodding. "But that doesn't mean she won't try to complicate things. Be prepared for her to bring up anything she can: financial disagreements, emotional grievances, even minor arguments." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I just want this over with." "And it will be," Margaret assured me. "But it'll take time. Stay focused, and don't let her bait you into emotional confrontations. That's what she'll expect." As I left the office, I felt a mixture of determination and exhaustion. The road ahead was going to be long and messy, but I wasn't going to let Jessica, or Brian, win. When I got home, I saw that Jessica had left a note on the counter. "Mike, I know you hate me right now, and I don't blame you. I'm sorry for everything. I'll stay at my sister's until we figure out what happens next. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me someday, even if we can't fix this. I'll always love you. Jessica. I stared at the note for a long time before folding it in half and shoving it into a drawer. Forgiveness might come one day, but not now. Not anytime soon. For now, all I could focus on was moving forward, one step at a time. The house felt emptier with Jessica gone, but at least it didn't feel suffocating anymore. That small shift was the first sign I might actually survive this mess. I threw myself into work, spending long hours at the office to avoid coming home to silence. Jason checked in regularly, usually dragging me out for dinner or beers when he sensed I was starting to sink into my own head. "Any word from Jessica?" he asked one night as we sat in a dimly lit bar, nursing drinks. "Not since she left the note," I replied, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. "She's staying at her sister's. I guess she's waiting to see what happens with the divorce." Jason raised an eyebrow. "You think she's actually remorseful, or just playing for sympathy?" I shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe both. It doesn't matter, though. I've made up my mind." Jason nodded, tipping his bottle toward me. "Good. Keep that resolve. It's easy to doubt yourself in situations like this, but don't forget why you're here." He was right, of course. The evidence was undeniable. Jessica's tears and apologies couldn't erase the betrayal. Still, some nights I found myself staring at the ceiling, wondering how things had gone so wrong. The only real relief came when Emily called again a few days later. It had become a strange routine, late-night conversations where we vented about the nightmare we were both living through. "I filed for divorce," she said during one of those calls, her voice calm but tired. "Good for you," I said, genuinely impressed. "That's not an easy step to take." "It wasn't," she admitted. "But after everything, I realized staying with Brian would have been worse. He begged me to give him another chance, said he'd go to counseling, whatever it took. But how could I ever trust him again?" "You couldn't," I said simply. "That's what I told him," she replied. And honestly, it felt freeing. Like I was finally taking my life back. Her words stuck with me. Maybe that was what I needed to focus on, not the betrayal, not the anger, but the freedom to rebuild my life without the weight of Jessica's lies. The next morning, I decided to make a change. I went through the house, gathering anything that reminded me of her, photos, keepsakes, even the stupid coffee mug she always used. I packed it all into a box and shoved it into the back of the closet. Out of sight, out of mind. I also decided to sell the house. It was too big for just me, and every corner was steeped in memories I didn't want anymore. Margaret said it was a smart move, especially since Jessica would likely push for a share of the property. Selling it now would keep things clean and simple. Putting the house on the market felt like ripping off a band-aid. Painful, but necessary. As I walked through the empty rooms, I felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and relief. This was where I'd built a life with Jessica, but it was also where that life had crumbled. Letting go of the house felt like letting go of that pain, piece by piece. Emily called again the day the listing went live. "I heard you're selling the house," she said. "Word gets around," I replied with a small laugh. "I think it's a good idea," she said. "A fresh start, you know?" "That's the plan," I said. "What about you? Any plans for a fresh start?" "I'm moving out," she said. "I found a small apartment across town. It's not much, but it's mine. Feels good to have something that's just mine." "I get that," I said. "Sometimes it's not about how big or fancy it is. It's about what it represents." "Exactly," she said, her tone lightening. "It's weird, isn't it? How the worst thing that ever happened to us is also giving us a chance to start over." "Yeah," I said. "Weird but kind of hopeful, too." For the first time in weeks, I hung up the phone with a genuine sense of optimism. That weekend, Jason and I went to an outdoor market downtown, something we hadn't done since before all this chaos started. As we wandered through the stalls, I realized how good it felt to be out in the world again, surrounded by people and life. At one of the booths, a woman was selling handmade pottery. A simple, glazed coffee mug caught my eye, a deep green color with a smooth finish. "That for Jessica?" Jason teased as I picked it up. "No," I said firmly, holding it up to inspect the craftsmanship. "This one's for me." Jason grinned. "Good. About time you started thinking about yourself." Buying that mug felt like a small but significant step. It wasn't about replacing Jessica or pretending she'd never existed. It was about reclaiming my life, piece by piece. I wasn't whole yet. I wasn't even close. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. And that was enough for now. The weeks following Jessica's departure were strange, like living in limbo. The house was on the market, the divorce papers had been filed, and Jessica remained silent aside from a few logistical texts about splitting up finances or retrieving her belongings. For the most part, I avoided those interactions, letting my lawyer handle everything. Emily and I kept in touch. At first, it was just commiseration, shared late-night calls where we vented about our respective situations. But gradually, the tone of our conversations began to shift. One evening, as I sat in my half-empty living room, Emily called. "Hey," she said, her voice lighter than usual. "How's the house sale going?" "Got an offer today," I replied. "It's lower than I hoped, but I'm tempted to take it just to be done with this place." She laughed softly. "I get that. When I moved out of our house, I didn't even care about the details. I just wanted to be gone." "How's the apartment treating you?" I asked. "It's cozy," she said, a smile in her voice. "It's not much, but it's mine, and that's what matters. I even bought some furniture, stuff that's actually my style. No more of Brian's sleek, lifeless designs." I chuckled. "I guess I need to start thinking about furniture for wherever I end up. Everything in this house feels tainted. Let me know if you need help picking things out," she said. "I have a surprising talent for interior design." "Is that an offer?" I asked, amused. "Maybe," she replied playfully. "But only if you buy me a coffee first." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Was she joking, or was there something more to her comment? "Deal," I said finally, surprising even myself. We made plans to meet the following Saturday at a local cafe. It was the first time we'd see each other face to face since everything had unraveled. When Saturday rolled around, I found myself feeling oddly nervous. I showed up at the cafe 10 minutes early, my hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee as I waited. Emily arrived right on time, her auburn hair pulled back into a loose braid and a warm scarf wrapped around her neck. She looked different than I remembered, lighter, freer, like someone who had finally let go of a heavy burden. "Hey," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Hey," I replied, offering a small smile. We ordered coffee and settled into easy conversation. At first, we talked about the practicalities of moving on, selling houses, navigating divorce proceedings, learning how to be alone again. But soon, the conversation shifted to lighter topics: favorite TV shows, embarrassing childhood stories, even our shared love of hiking. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. "You know," Emily said after a while, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly, "I never thought I'd feel normal again after everything. But sitting here with you, it's nice. Like maybe there's hope for both of us after all." Her words caught me off guard, but I found myself nodding. "Yeah," I said. "I didn't think I'd be ready to move forward, but I don't know. It feels like things are finally starting to make sense again." She smiled, her eyes warm and kind. "We've been through the worst. Maybe it's time we start focusing on what's next." Over the next few weeks, Emily and I started spending more time together. It wasn't anything serious, not yet. But we found comfort in each other's company, a shared understanding that no one else could offer. One evening, as we sat on her apartment balcony watching the sunset, she turned to me and said, Do you think we'll ever stop feeling like this? Like we're defined by what they did to us? I thought about it for a moment before replying. I don't think it'll ever completely go away. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. What they did hurt, yeah, but it also showed us what we don't want in our lives. Maybe that's how we move forward, by focusing on what we deserve, not what we've lost. Emily leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. I like that, she said softly. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was starting to live again. As the weeks turned into months, life began to take on a strange sense of normalcy. The house finally sold, and with Margaret's help, the divorce was moving forward without any major obstacles. Jessica had stopped trying to reach out, which was a relief. The silence between us was a confirmation that there was no going back, and I had no desire to reopen wounds that were finally starting to heal. Emily and I continued to see each other. What started as a friendship built on shared pain was slowly becoming something more. We weren't rushing it, either of us wanted to jump into anything too soon, but there was an undeniable connection. She made me laugh in a way I hadn't in years, and I found myself looking forward to our time together. One Friday evening, she invited me over for dinner. It was the first time I'd been to her new apartment, and the space was a reflection of her, simple, warm, and full of personality. This is nice, I said as I stepped inside. Cozy. Thanks, she replied, smiling as she handed me a glass of wine. I'm still getting used to it, but it's starting to feel like home. We spent the evening cooking together, chopping vegetables and laughing as she teased me about my poor knife skills. By the time we sat down to eat, the tension that had been hovering around us for weeks felt like it had finally lifted. This is really good, I said between bites of pasta. Glad you like it, she said, her eyes twinkling. I was worried you'd think it was too simple. Simple's underrated, I replied. Sometimes it's the best thing. Her smile softened, and for a moment we just sat there, the silence between us comfortable. After dinner, we moved to the couch, a bottle of wine between us. The conversation flowed easily, but there was an undercurrent of something unspoken, a feeling we were both skirting around. Eventually, Emily set her glass down and turned to face me. Mike, can I ask you something? Of course, I said, setting my own glass aside. Do you think we're doing this too soon? Her question caught me off guard, but I appreciated her honesty. I took a moment to think before answering. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe we are. But I also know that being around you doesn't feel rushed or wrong. It feels good. And after everything we've been through, I think we deserve that. She studied my face for a moment, then nodded. Yeah. It does feel good, doesn't it? It does, I said, smiling. The air between us shifted, and before I knew it, she was leaning closer. When our lips met, it was gentle at first, hesitant, as if we were both testing the waters. But as the kiss deepened, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside Emily's window. She was still asleep, her head resting on my shoulder, her hair spilling across the pillow. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of peace. As I lay there, watching the sunlight filter through the curtains, I thought about everything that had brought me to this moment. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the anger, it was all still there, but it didn't feel as heavy anymore. Emily stirred, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw me watching her, she smiled sleepily. Good morning. Good morning, I replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She stretched and sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. You okay? Yeah, I said, my voice soft. For the first time in a long time, I think I am. The days that followed felt like a turning point. Emily and I didn't rush into labeling whatever it was we had, but there was a quiet understanding between us that this was something worth exploring. We went on hikes, cooked meals together, and even started talking about our plans for the future, not as individuals, but as two people trying to build something new. One evening, as we sat on her balcony watching the sunset, she turned to me and said, Do you ever think about what they're doing now? Jessica and Brian? I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. Not really. They don't matter anymore. What matters is what's ahead, not what's behind. She smiled, reaching for my hand. I like that. Moving forward. Together, I added, squeezing her hand gently. For the first time, I truly believed it. My life wasn't defined by the betrayal or the pain anymore. It was defined by the choices I was making now, the choice to heal, to move on, and to embrace the possibility of happiness again. And with Emily by my side, that possibility felt more real than ever. As Emily and I grew closer, the chaos of my old life slowly faded into the background. The divorce with Jessica was nearing its conclusion, with most of the major hurdles already behind us. Margaret assured me the final settlement would go in my favor, especially with the evidence I'd provided. Jessica had backed off from any real fight, which was both a relief and a confirmation that she had no defense for her actions. Still, loose ends had a way of resurfacing. One evening, as I was settling into my new apartment, modest but my own, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from Jessica. I hadn't heard from her in weeks, and seeing her name on the screen sent a jolt through me. Can we talk? Just once? I need closure. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Closure? What kind of closure could she possibly want after everything she'd done? I debated ignoring it entirely, but something inside me told me it was better to face this head-on and finally put it to rest. After all, I'd moved on. This wasn't about her anymore, it was about me taking control of my narrative. Fine. Tomorrow, 3 p.m. The park. The next day, I arrived at the park early. It was a quiet, sunny afternoon, with families playing on the grass and joggers passing by on the trails. I sat on a bench near the fountain, feeling strangely calm. Jessica arrived a few minutes later, looking more subdued than I'd ever seen her. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked tired, older somehow, as if the weight of her choices had finally caught up to her. Hi, she said softly, stopping a few feet away. Hi, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She hesitated before sitting down next to me, leaving a careful distance between us. For a moment neither of us spoke. The sounds of the park filled the silence, children laughing, birds chirping, the distant hum of traffic. I didn't know if you'd come, she said finally, her hands fidgeting in her lap. I wasn't sure I wanted to, I admitted. But here I am. She nodded, taking a deep breath. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. For lying, for betraying you, for destroying what we had. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I needed to tell you that. Her words were raw, and for the first time, I saw a glimpse of the woman I'd once loved, the one who wasn't defined by her mistakes. I appreciate that, I said quietly. But you're right. I can't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. What you did, what you and Brian did, broke something in me that I'm still trying to rebuild. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't look away. I understand. I've spent every day since I left trying to figure out why I did what I did, and the truth is, I don't have an excuse. I was selfish, and I hurt you in ways I'll never be able to take back. I nodded, letting her words sink in. Jessica, I don't hate you. I don't think I ever could. But I don't love you anymore either. The person I loved wouldn't have done what you did. She wiped at her eyes, her shoulders shaking slightly. I know. And I'm sorry that I wasn't that person for you. For a long moment, we just sat there, the weight of everything we'd been through hanging in the air between us. Is Brian still in the picture? I asked finally, more out of curiosity than anything else. She shook her head. No. That ended pretty quickly after everything came out. Emily served him with divorce papers, and he, well, let's just say he showed his true colors. I realized he was never worth what I gave up. That's ironic, I said, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. I know, she said, her voice small. I've lost everything, Mike. my marriage, my home, my sense of who I am. And I have no one to blame but myself. It should have felt good to hear her admit that, but instead, it just felt sad. Well, I said, standing up. I hope you figure out how to rebuild, Jessica. I really do. But I need to keep moving forward, and that doesn't include you. She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with tears. Thank you? For meeting me. For hearing me out. I nodded, then turned and walked away. As I left the park, I felt a strange sense of finality. It wasn't closure in the way she'd probably wanted, but it was enough for me. That evening, Emily came over, bringing takeout and a bottle of wine. You okay? She asked as we sat on the couch, plates balanced on our laps. Yeah, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. I saw Jessica today. She wanted to talk. Emily raised an eyebrow. How'd that go? It was closure, I guess, I said, shrugging. She apologized, admitted she messed up. But it didn't change anything. It just made me realize how far I've come. Emily smiled, reaching over to squeeze my hand. That's huge, Mike. I'm proud of you. Thanks, I said, giving her hand a gentle squeeze in return. As the night went on, we talked and laughed, the shadows of the past fading further into the background. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to embrace it. Jessica was my past. Emily might just be my future. And for now, that was more than enough. The morning sunlight filtered through the curtains of my new apartment, casting a warm glow on the walls. It was a far cry from the house Jessica and I had shared, smaller, simpler, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every photo on the wall, every mug in the cabinet was chosen by me for me. Emily stirred next to me, her hair a mess from sleep, her breathing soft and steady. I watched her for a moment, marveling at how far my life had come since the day everything fell apart. She blinked awake, smiling when she saw me. Morning, she said, her voice still thick with sleep. Morning, I replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Staring at me while I sleep again? She teased, her grin widening. Can you blame me? I shot back, earning a playful swat on the arm. She stretched and sat up, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. What's the plan for today? I was thinking we could go check out that hiking trail you mentioned, I said. The one by the lake? Her eyes lit up. Really? You're actually up for a hike? I smirked. I'm full of surprises. After a quick breakfast, we packed a small bag and headed out. The drive to the trail was filled with easy conversation and laughter, the kind that felt natural and effortless. By the time we reached the trailhead, the air was crisp, the scent of pine and fresh earth filling our lungs. As we walked, I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't before. I told Emily about the doubts and fears I'd carried after the divorce, about how I wasn't sure I'd ever trust anyone again. She listened without judgment, sharing her own struggles and insecurities in return. It's weird, I said as we paused by the edge of the lake, the water shimmering in the sunlight. For a long time, I thought my life was over. I thought what Jessica did had broken me beyond repair. But now, I don't know. I feel like I'm finally starting to put the pieces back together. Emily nodded, her expression thoughtful. I get that. For months, I felt like Brian had taken everything from me, my confidence, my sense of self. But being here with you, it's like I've found something I didn't even know I was looking for. I turned to her, taking her hands in mine. Emily, I don't know where this is going, but I do know that being with you feels right. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I can actually be happy again. She smiled, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Me too. We stood there for a moment, the world around us quiet and still, as if it was holding its breath. Then, without thinking, I leaned in and kissed her, the kind of kiss that felt like a promise of something new, something worth fighting for. The months that followed were a whirlwind of change. The divorce was finalized, and Jessica and I parted ways for good. I didn't hear from her again, and I didn't feel the need to. That chapter of my life was closed. Emily and I continued to grow closer, our relationship built on honesty and trust. We took things slow, savoring each step of the journey. We traveled together, explored new hobbies, and spent lazy Sundays cooking in my small kitchen. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of my apartment watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, Emily turned to me and said, "Do you ever think about the future? Like what you want it to look like?" "All the time," I admitted. "And lately it's been looking a lot like this. Like us." She smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. "Me too." Looking back, I realized that the pain and betrayal I'd experienced hadn't defined me, it had shaped me. It forced me to reevaluate what I wanted, what I deserved, and what I was willing to fight for. Jessica and Brian had broken something in me, but they hadn't destroyed me. And now, standing on the other side of it all, I could finally see the truth. The end of my marriage wasn't the end of my life. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. With Emily by my side, I was ready to write it.